Joining me now is our party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative national campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the federal NDP. Here we are at the end of the last week before the election, it seems, right? Greg, let's start with you. We've got Mark Carney kind of using this week to try to set the stage for Sunday when he's going to go to Rita Hall, we hear, to start the election. But you can see Danielle Smith also trying to set the stage a little bit. How does today sort of set us up for the election campaign?
It does seem that Danielle Smith continues to be offside with the majority of the premiers. And I'm not sure that this is a note that she's giving that Canadians are going to be really appreciative right now. It seemed really partisan yesterday, and her comments. I think back to over the holidays, the CBC comedy show 22 Minutes asked a bunch of prominent Canadians, what do you want for 2025? And there was, their beloved Habs or, wishes for this. And Danielle Smith very excitedly said, Prime Minister Ford-Poilievre. So I think, we know what she really wants there is it's through a partisan lens. And I'm not sure that that's a message that's being well received by Canadians. You mentioned Scott Moe's criticism. Well, Prime Minister Carney met with Premier Ford, Premier Legault. And I think the meetings overseas in France and the UK were incredibly important, and it also sent a message to those allies, and it also sent a message to the United States. I heard for a long time, following the Trump tariff threats, that why hasn't Canada built other relationships? Well, the reality is it was easy to deal with the United States, and we had a good relationship for a long time. Well, now he's building those relationships. Right. So the premiers that sound are a little, like if you can go to Mar-a-Lago and not go to the First Minister's meeting, in the case of Danielle Smith, I'm not sure Canadians are enjoying that.
Well, but Fred, Danielle Smith's point is that these are domestic issues she wants dealt with in a run-up to an election campaign. So it's not an uncommon thing. She's not sort of being Trumpy, with this. But it seemed to me, with what Mark Carney said yesterday, that he's getting ready to move off the emissions cap, or at least put flexibility into it. Terry Duguid said something different, but I'm going to say the Prime Minister's opinion matters a little bit more than the new minister's position on this. And we should get some clarity at 6, right?
Clarity would be nice.
Yeah, I agree.
That's one of the issues we keep hearing with Carney is, one thing in English, a different thing in French. That's what was going on during the leadership campaign, and now we're seeing it. He's going out and saying one thing, as Premier Smith mentioned, said to him, and then a cabinet minister contradicting it. That's a big problem, and it's fair to call that out when you see that.
Do you think that's just growing pains of week 1, or what do you think that is? Because they both said it in English, and it's a Western Canadian thing, right?
I think, one of the issues is Carney is the leader of Justin Trudeau's team. This is Justin Trudeau's team. They all have that same mindset that they've had, that they ran this government for the last 9 years. It hasn't changed. Now, where does he actually sit? Is he just campaigning right now too? Or does he believe this? Is he trying to pull something over all of us?
Mel, it certainly seems like there is a flexibility there from the Prime Minister. I guess they'll have to sort it out with Terry Duguid, but I'm going to guess Mark Carney will trump Terry Duguid, and I think it'll be a question he's asked at 6 o'clock when we expect to hear from the Prime Minister. Well, what do you make of where things are going into this last weekend with the First Ministers getting together after the overseas trip?
Right. Well, I think it's interesting. You pointed to the fact that this isn't unusual to hear either premiers or the provinces say something in the lead up to a federal election or during the federal election. I think we're in a really different moment, though, right? We are all of Canada staring down threats from the U.S. So I think the pulse of folks, I don't necessarily think is, to try to take shots at folks who are running, in the federal election. But I also don't know that there's a lot of capacity with people to entertain that kind of talk. So I don't know, it's worked for Danielle Smith in the past. It's worked for Premier Scott Moe in the past too. I should say Premier Danielle Smith too. But I don't know that people are feeling that way right now to just do those maybe seemingly partisan attacks for partisan sake. I think the context of the questions, I think, are super fair. The fact that they're saying two different things, they need to be clear on that. That's super fair. Even the criticism of Premier Moe about going to Europe, I shared similar concerns, when we're a week away from an election. So those are legitimate things to be asking, and folks at home are asking those questions too. I think just the tone is just different. We're in a different time right now, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Look, I have been asking these questions as well, right? Trying to get some clarity on this, and the inability to get a straight answer beyond, you should ask the Prime Minister tonight, that feels a little bit like the growing pains of a team in transition. I don't know, but if we don't get an answer at 6 o'clock, Fred, Eastern, by the way, and just to let people at home know what's going on. The First Minister's meeting, we're expecting that to break up around 5:30 Eastern, so in about 18 minutes from now. The premiers will start speaking, and then we expect to hear from the Prime Minister at around 6 o'clock. They're just on the road from where we are at the National War Museum here in Ottawa. You know, a thematically appropriate backdrop for what the country is going through and what it's about to go through once the election officially begins. But, you know, just to go back to this point, Fred, like if Carney comes out at 6 o'clock, the Prime Minister comes out at 6 o'clock and doesn't have clarity on this, that's problematic with an election starting on Sunday.
Of course it is. It's a very clear answer, or should be, that he should be able to give. But again, does he mean it is the other thing too. Is he sincere when he's talking about this stuff? Because it is telling when a cabinet minister says something completely different and contradicts him. So he's going to have to make us believe him somehow, and I'm not sure how he'll do that. Greg,
a quick 20 seconds, and then I want to get to something else, because Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre were weighing in on something we talked about in yesterday's show that was in the Toronto Star, and I do want to get that in. What do you think we're going to hear from the Prime Minister in a little bit on this?
I think you're going to get the clarity, and I would cut them some slack. It was a pretty incredible week, and Fred, you've been asking for an election for a long time. I'm just really happy that you're going to get what you want.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I'm happy.
Yeah. Okay, look, this is what I want to touch on, because we talked to Rob Benzie from the Toronto Star on the show yesterday. He had a story saying that on Monday there was a phone call between Pierre Poilievre and Doug Ford, and there was some issues there because both Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre are out today denying that Toronto Star story. The Star reported that Poilievre called Ford to ask for advice on the upcoming federal election. In fact, started off saying that he asked for help, but the Premier said to Poilievre that he was too busy governing Ontario.
Well, first of all, it was the first time I ever spoke to him. And I guess what was reported is not accurate at all. He didn't ask me for help, and he didn't, so I don't know where they came up with that story. I just, you know, I want to see how each leader is going to protect Ontario. I just don't believe in interfering in the federal election. That's going to be up to the people to decide. I don't care about political stripes. I just don't. So what can you do for Ontario? And that's it.
Well, that phone call, it did happen between the two Conservative leaders, reportedly took place some 18 days after Ford won re-election. And when asked today about the call, Poilievre did not elaborate on why it took him that long to speak with Premier Ford.
So what is your version of that conversation? Why did it take nearly 3 weeks to congratulate him on his win? And why is it that we so rarely hear either of you say very nice things about each other?
Well, the report is not accurate. I did speak to the Premier, as I do with all premiers whenever they want to talk. And we talk about bringing home jobs to Canada, supporting the Ring of Fire, cutting taxes, unleashing our production, and reversing the lost Liberal decade of the last 9 years.
Okay, I want to pick that up there. Fred, it's interesting. You got to sort of parse the denials a little bit, because the initial Star story said Poilievre called and asked for help, and that became they talked and asked for advice. So the denial is that there was an ask for help and a rejection for help. There was a conversation about advice. But Ford did say repeatedly he's not getting involved. He doesn't want his MPs to get involved. And the surprising thing I heard there was that this is the first conversation Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre have ever had.
Right.
Not since he won re-election, ever. I mean, you worked on the Ford re-election campaign. What's going on here?
Well, look, in terms of not getting involved in the election, it makes perfect sense. If you look at Ford's record, he's never been involved in federal campaigns.
2015, him and Rob Ford. Well, since he's been leader. Yes, fair.
As Premier of Ontario, he works with whoever mayors are and whoever prime ministers are. And he's held that standard. And I think, you know, he was going to work with whoever wins this. His focus in the last number of months in his election was to protect Ontario. And he needs to be that, you know, he has been the captain of Team Canada as the chair of the Council of the Federation. So this is, again, just his leadership style and how he's working. So I'm not surprised he's not going to get involved.
You're surprised it's the first time they ever spoke, though?
I am surprised at that.
That's weird to me. That's strange. Not weird, but that surprises me.
Yeah,
strange.
I mean, look, they're not always aligned on things. They're different. You know, the Conservative Party is a very broad coalition. There's lots of different types of Conservatives, and I wouldn't say they're the same type.
Fair.
So I can see where they're, you know, haven't been the closest in that regard.
Mel, what do you make of that? I mean, I find it unusual that the national leader of the Conservative Party and the most powerful elected Conservative politician in Canada, in Doug Ford, didn't speak until Monday passed.
For sure. I don't think I'm breaking any news when I say that Jagmeet regularly speaks to Premier Canoe and Premier Eby, if only for, what are the priorities that you're working on that we can champion here in Ottawa. Forget, election and partisan interests. You believe in these things to make people's lives better. We believe in the same one. How can we champion those here too? So absolutely, it's strange, but not surprising, right? Like, we've talked around this table and we've talked outside of this table about how when Poilievre was 20 points up in the polls, he wasn't really making a lot of friends when he was that high up. We've heard rumors about how, they thought they could win without any support from the PCs in Ontario, and I think that's kind of the story that we're seeing. And to Fred's point, I think Conservatives in Ontario are very different than how Pierre Poilievre is positioning himself. And to Premier Ford's credit, he has been doing a good job communicating with people in how we face Trump, and that has been the I think total lack of Poilievre's ability to do that. So I think those are some interesting threads to pull from there, and again, surprising that this is the first time that they talk. But again, I am surprised, but I'm also not surprised.
Greg, what do you make of this? Because when I heard that from Ford today, I was like, huh. And I know there was the photo of Mr. Poilievre and his wife, Anna Poilievre, meeting with François Legault yesterday in Quebec. But it struck me as how rarely you see him meeting with provincial leaders, right? Like, nowhere near Tim Houston during his campaign, did do a fundraiser with Blaine Higgs. A natural sort of alliance with Scott Moe and Daniel Smith, but it's just, it struck me as surprising that the two had never spoken before at all.
Incredibly surprising. As much as a Liberal, I'm loath to admit it, Doug Ford is successful. Why would you not want to talk to somebody and say, how have you been able to do this 3 times? What are your areas of strength in Ontario? And so what happens is, in Ottawa, we start to, filter through the tea leaves, and there is, an advisor to the Conservative leader who used to work for Doug Ford, rumored not to be getting along. There's a member of Parliament who very publicly worked for the Ford government and left angry and took a shot at one of Doug Ford's ministers. So you're watching that and you're just thinking, the whole message of the time that Mel just referred to when Poilievre was 20 points ahead was he was not doing anything to build on that and to strengthen relationships. And when that evaporates, what do you have left? And not a hell of a lot. So I'm blown away that they've never had that conversation before, and I think there'd be probably, if it was my party and the labels, the party stripes were different, there'd be a lot of questions.
So Fred, just a final point on this. Like, going into the election, Tim Houston and everybody kind of told their federal leaders to stay away during the Nova Scotia election. But, if Mark Carney goes to Newfoundland and Labrador, Andrew Furey will do something with him. Susan Holt probably do something with him in New Brunswick. I don't know if that will be with Houston. Ford's staying out of it. Legault seems to be striking a more neutral stance in this election. Does that matter in an election if you don't have that with you? I mean, do you get a lift from that, or is it neutral?
You don't really. Now, Ford is a different character because he's such a big name in Canada right now, being, again, Captain Canada, that I'll keep calling him. So there is a difference with that. But generally, no. With a lot of these premiers, there's, you're going in and you're trying to elevate your candidates and the people that are actually on the ballot when you're campaigning.